When a landlocked nation forces three superpowers to step back, they once said Burkina Faso would never matter. No ports, no oil, no nuclear weapons, just dust, drought, and silence. But then, the dam appeared. A $24 billion megaproject not announced by the West, not by China, but by India and a small landlocked country the world had long forgotten. A dam so massive that Paris is rattled, Washington is worried, and Beijing is openly furious. Because this is not just about water. It's about who gets to decide what Africa builds and who gets left out. So the question is, why are the world's superpowers reacting as if they've just been outplayed by two nations they once dismissed? If that question haunts you the way it haunts them, hit subscribe, stay with us, because what you're about to hear will change how you see power in Africa forever. A handshake between New Delhi and Ouagadougou is forcing the world to redraw the map of power. When the announcement broke, it didn't come from Davos, Washington, or the UN. It came quietly from Ouagadougou and New Delhi, but the numbers were too loud to ignore. A $24 billion hydroelectric dam, positioned to be one of Africa's largest infrastructure projects in decades. The dam, officially called the Mahanadi Sahel Hydropower Corridor, is a joint initiative between India and Burkina Faso, with technical support from India's National Hydropower Corporation and funding facilitated through a new South-South investment platform, bypassing World Bank protocols entirely. Located along the Nakambe River, the dam's primary function is power, enough to electrify large parts of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. But behind the turbines lies the real power play, control over the future of West Africa's development path, independent of the West or China. India's motivations are strategic and symbolic. This isn't just a construction deal, it's a declaration. For decades, India has been playing catch-up with China's Belt and Road Initiative in Africa. But this time, India moved first, and not in a soft, NGO-driven way. This was bold, industrial, and unapologetically political. Burkina Faso, under Captain Ibrahim Traoré, saw an opening and took it, isolated by France, ignored by the IMF, and punished by the EU for expelling foreign troops. Burkina Faso had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. What better way to rewrite the rules than by partnering with a rising Asian power that shares no colonial past? According to initial plans, the project includes a dam structure spanning nearly 1.5 kilometers, a $3 power station with 12 turbine units, an irrigation grid serving over 250,000 hectares, a regional power transmission line to Mali and Niger, 20,000 plus, direct and indirect jobs over 7 years. But the most disruptive part, the financing bypasses the global financial order. Instead of Western banks or Chinese state loans, the funds are pooled from Indian sovereign funds, private African capital, and support from the newly created AES Infrastructure Fund, shared by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. No IMF, no World Bank, no colonial oversight. And that's where the tremors began. Because this dam is not just a blueprint for energy, it's a model for defiance. A working template that proves African states can fund, build, and operate mega projects without going through Paris, Washington, or Beijing. And once proven in Burkina Faso, what stops others from following? For a long time, development in Africa came with a foreign flag attached. Roads were paved by China, ports managed by France, electricity tied to USIS, lead power Africa initiatives. But now, out of nowhere, a small, defiant, landlocked nation is building a future on its own terms. So ask yourself, if Burkina Faso and India can do this without permission, who else might try? And if Africa no longer needs its development partners, what happens to those who built their power on being needed? When Paris, Beijing, and Washington all fall silent, it's not peace. It's a shockwave. They did not issue statements. They did not hold press conferences. But the silence spoke louder than words. Within days of the dam's announcement, Paris summoned a closed-door meeting at the Élysée, not with African leaders, but with executives from Total Energies, EDF, and France's water infrastructure lobby. The question, how did this happen without us? Burkina Faso, once a reliable vassal of French influence, had struck a deal bypassing both Brussels and Paris, and that sent a message more dangerous than any military coup: African self-determination. Meanwhile, in Beijing, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a carefully worded statement praising infrastructure cooperation across the global south. But behind closed doors, think tanks linked to China's Belt and Road Initiative were already labeling the India-Burkina Faso dam as a strategic deviation from acceptable alignment. Translation: a threat. China had invested billions in African hydropower, especially in Ethiopia and Angola. Yet here was a major energy corridor forming in West Africa, and China wasn't even invited to the table. Worse, India was now using the same tools China had pioneered: concessional loans, construction brigades, state-backed contractors. The playbook had been copied and turned against its author. As for Washington, the response was less immediate, but equally telling. Analysts at the State Department's Africa Bureau flagged the dam as part of a larger regional assertiveness trend among AES nations. Internal memos warn that India's growing presence in the Sahel could dilute U.S. influence at a time when French control is collapsing. One leaked report from a private U.S. defense contractor stated bluntly, "This is the first time an African state has executed a high-capital multinational infrastructure deal without Western financing or Chinese oversight. This is a red flag." What these powers fear is not just the dam itself. It is what the dam represents. Because if Burkina Faso, a country under sanctions, with no coast, no IMF loans, and active insurgencies, can mobilize $24 billion and build the largest energy project in West Africa with a non-Western partner, then what excuse do other nations have? This is what has Paris whispering. This is what has Beijing recalculating. And this is what has Washington watching, closer than ever before. Because when you control the grid, you control the growth. And when you build it without them, you take away their favorite word, leverage. So now ask yourself, if power is no longer gifted from above, but built from within, what happens to those who once held the switch? This is not just about electricity. This is about citizenship. This is a declaration. We deserve to live like everyone else. The numbers are stunning, but the impact on daily life is even more electrifying. In Burkina Faso, over 70% of the population lives without reliable electricity. In rural areas, darkness begins at sunset, not metaphorically, but literally. Children study by candlelight. Farmers rely on outdated irrigation. Hospitals run on diesel fumes and prayer. But with the India-funded Mehanadi Sahel Dam, that darkness is starting to lift, first on paper, then in the real world. 25 new substations are planned across the country. A national smart grid pilot will roll out in 2027. Nearly 2.4 million homes are expected to gain consistent access to electricity in the first 5 years. This is not just development, it's liberation. And for Ibrahim Traoré, it's political armor. While Western headlines still portray him as a military strongman in villages across Burkina Faso, he is becoming something else entirely, a provider. Not of ideology, not of propaganda, but of cold, hard infrastructure. As one farmer in Koudougu put it, "I don't care what Paris says. The first time my crops are watered by electricity, I will know who really leads this country." The dam has also galvanized national pride. Local universities have already partnered with Indian technical schools to train the first wave of engineers, hydrologists, and energy analysts. A new vocational school is being built in Bobo Dioulasso just for renewable energy technicians. For the youth, this means jobs. For the poor, this means dignity. And for the displaced, it means a reason to stay. This project is not just infrastructure, it's resistance to collapse. In a region plagued by terrorism, poverty, and brain drain, a massive public works initiative offers something most powerful than any border fence: hope. But it also comes with risk. Environmental groups have raised questions about resettlement zones and ecological disruption. Opposition figures, though politically weakened, warn about debt dependency, even if the loans aren't from the IMF. And foreign intelligence agencies, they're watching something else: political capital. Because if Traoré delivers 24/7 electricity before 2030, he doesn't just become hard to remove, he becomes impossible to replace. And that may be the part that truly frightens his critics. Not the dam, but what happens when it works. So now ask yourself, if light reaches where power never has, what else might follow? Hospitals, factories, free thinking. And if development becomes homegrown, what need will Africa have for foreign saviors at all? When they are no longer the ones building the bridge, the U.S. and the West must learn to wait for the other side to step across first. For decades, the West played the role of architect in Africa. America offered Power Africa. France built bridges and trained elites. The World Bank designed blueprints for inclusive growth. But the India-Burkina Faso dam changed something fundamental. The West was not even in the room. Washington's initial reaction was muted. No open condemnation, no press release. But inside Foggy Bottom, analysts began to draw lines connecting dots that hadn't existed before. India moving into Sahel infrastructure. AES nations rejecting French troops, state-led development outside the Bretton Woods system. The conclusion: Africa's center of gravity is shifting, and we're not guiding it anymore. In the halls of Capitol Hill, some U.S. officials see opportunity. If India can outbid China in Africa, that helps us. But others see a deeper concern. A new global South forming, one that owes the West nothing. Meanwhile, in Paris, the tone is bitter. Former French diplomats call the dam project a betrayal, not of treaties, but of tradition, of a West African region once under France's thumb, now standing tall with a different set of allies. In Brussels, EU development advisors are scrambling. Internal documents show attempts to reframe the India-Burkina Faso partnership as unsustainable, opaque, or even neo-colonial in disguise. But that narrative is struggling to stick because the dam is being built, not just announced. And in Beijing, strategy is recalibrating. While India gains visibility, China is expected to counter with soft retaliation, increased project bidding in neighboring states, covert pressure on African central banks, and tech sector entrenchment. Some experts even predict cyber disruptions targeting AES infrastructure flows. Across the board, one thing is clear: this dam is not just a project, it's a geopolitical litmus test. It asks a brutal question. What does the West do when it's no longer needed? No battlefield, no coup, no grand rebellion, just a quiet dam in the Sahel, shifting the gravitational field of influence, one contract at a time. So now, ask yourself, can the world's oldest powers accept a world that no longer revolves around them? And if not, What will they do next to stop the future from being built without their permission? If a single dam can reshape the energy map, then who is redrawing the political one? The road ahead is not smooth. No $24 billion project ever is. But what makes the Mahanadi Sahel Dam remarkable is not its engineering, it's the ideology embedded in its concrete. A worldview that says Africa doesn't need permission to build, that cooperation can come from the global south, that futures can be drafted in Ouagadougou just as much as in Washington. Already, other nations are watching. Ghana has expressed interest in joining the regional power grid. Mali and Niger are aligning deeper into AES-led infrastructure blocks. And in East Africa, quiet conversations are starting. Could a similar model work along the Nile Basin, outside Western debt frameworks? India, for its part, knows this project is more than a dam. It's a case study. If it succeeds, it won't just elevate India's standing in Africa, it will undermine the Western monopoly on development pathways. A strategic win that requires no soldiers, no speeches, just steel and megawatts. For Burkina Faso, the risks remain high. Sabotage, political or digital, cannot be ruled out. Currency pressure, disinformation campaigns, and diplomatic isolation are all on the table. But something irreversible has already begun. A nation once dismissed as poor and unstable has forced 3 global powers to respond without firing a bullet. And that alone changes the game. So what comes next? More than energy, more than jobs, more than dams. What comes next is belief. Belief that Africa can define itself, build for itself. Stand alone, if needed, but more importantly, choose its partners by design, not default. So now, we ask, if one project can shift the axis of influence, what might 5 do? Or 10? Or 50? And if Africa chooses to build without asking, who will be brave enough to answer, not with resistance, but respect? No one declared war, but every seat of power is being reclaimed. What if this is only the beginning? The dam is not a one-time event. It's a template, and the world knows it. That's why the silence is so heavy, because once a nation like Burkina Faso shows it can build without begging, others will follow, not because of ideology, but because of survival. Across the continent, leaders are watching Traoré, not for his speeches, but for his results. Not for how he defies the West, but for how he delivers the lights. And if the lights come on before 2030, if jobs are created, if food is grown where there was once only dust, then everything changes. India will rise, not as a new colonizer, but as a blueprint challenger. France will lose its final leverage. America will be forced to pivot, not with pressure, but with partnership. And China will adapt fast and hard. But perhaps the most important shift is the psychological one, that a poor country with no port, under sanctions, surrounded by insurgency, still chose to build. And that choice may be more revolutionary than any speech, flag, or protest. So now, it's your turn. Ask yourself, if a country like Burkina Faso can break the rules and build the future, why can't others? Why haven't they? And more importantly, who's still standing in their way? Because maybe the dam was never the threat. Maybe the real threat was the idea that Africa never needed permission in the first place. If that idea spreads, the age of the gatekeepers ends, and a new era begins. So if you've made it this far, hit subscribe. Share this with someone who still believes the old rules apply, and ask them, would you fight for a future built by your own hands, or wait for someone else to give it to you? When a landlocked nation forces 3 superpowers to step back, they once said Burkina Faso would never matter. No ports, no oil, no nuclear weapons, just dust, drought, and silence. But then, the dam appeared. A $24 billion megaproject not announced by the West, not by China, but by India and a small landlocked country the world had long forgotten. A dam so massive that Paris is rattled, Washington is worried, and Beijing is openly furious. Because this is not just about water. It's about who gets to decide what Africa builds and who gets left out. So the question is, why are the world's superpowers reacting as if they've just been outplayed by two nations they once dismissed? If that question haunts you the way it haunts them, hit subscribe, stay with us, because what you're about to hear will change how you see power in Africa forever. A handshake between New Delhi and Ouagadougou is forcing the world to redraw the map of power. When the announcement broke, it didn't come from Davos, Washington, or the UN. It came quietly from Ouagadougou and New Delhi. But the numbers were too loud to ignore. A $24 billion hydroelectric dam, positioned to be one of Africa's largest infrastructure projects in decades. The dam, officially called the Mahanadi Sahel Hydropower Corridor, is a joint initiative between India and Burkina Faso, with technical support from India's National Hydropower Corporation and funding facilitated through a new South-South investment platform, bypassing World Bank protocols entirely. Located along the Nakambe River, the dam's primary function is power, enough to electrify large parts of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. But behind the turbines lies the